please take a seat so that we can start our proceedings.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start a few minutes early, which I think is particularly appropriate because Thomas was always early. We're going to commence today by inviting Dave Pikia from Earnslaw 1 to deliver a karakia. Dave.
Kia ora everybody. Nā mihi kia koutou, Lei Singh in your whānau. Also acknowledgement to Dr. Tiong, nā mihi, and also distinguished guests to participate in the memorial of Thomas Song. Before I start to do the karakia, I will go through a couple of things, which is a mihi whakatauki, greetings, and that followed by my PPR. Then the karakia. I will translate everything. Kia ora. Tauaraki ki te pō, ti toki ki te ao mārama, ti he mauri ora. Tuatai e mi ana ki te atua nana nei nā mea katoa. Te whare e tu nei, kai pupuri e nā taonga o tēnei te hira, tēnā koe. E te papa e takoto nei, Ngāti Whātua, nā iwi maha, tēnā koutou. E nā mate o te wā, hari atu rā ki a waiki tāwhiti, hoki mai ki a tātou te hunga ora tēnā. Tēnā koe, kia ora. As the cloak of darkness prevails at night, the shining light guides me forward to Te Ei Māori ora. First, I would like to acknowledge our Almighty Creator, also the house that we stand here, housing the taonga of old, tēnā koe, the land that lays here, the tribal people of Ngāti Whātua in many of its tribes. Tēnā koutou, to those who have passed and returned to the ancient homelands. We who are gathered here today, greetings and salutations. My PPR is about me and where I come from. Ko mangahumi te maunga, ko Waipawa te awa, ko Rauta te waka, ko Ngāti Wāhia te hapu, ko te eitanga mahaki te iwi, ko rangatira te marae, ko te whakahau, te wharenui, ko Rauri Pikia taku ingoa, tēnā koe. What I have just said, my maunga, my mountain is called Mangahoumi. The river is called Waipawa. The Horauta is my waka, my boat. Ngāti Wāhia is my sub-tribe. My iwi, which is my tribe, is Te Etanga Mahaki. My marae is called Rangatira. The whare that sits in Rangatira is called Te Whakahau. My name is Rauri Pikia, Dave Pikia. Kia ora. Karakia, e noi tātou, let us pray. Manoa mai te mauri nuku, manoa mai te mauri rangi, ko te mauri kaiau. He mauri te pua, ka pakaru mai te pō, tau mai te mauri. Umi e, hui e, taeki e. Embrace the life force of earth, embrace the life force of the sky. The life force I gathered is powerful and shatters all darkness. Come great life force, join it, gather it, it has been completed. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Dave. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all here today to join me in recognising the life and contribution of our colleague, our leader, and our friend, Thomas Song. Special welcome to Thomas's family, to his wife Lei Sieng, and to his son Stephen and daughter Sui Sing, and to Dr. Paul Tiong and his son James, who have travelled from Singapore, and Kenny Tiong, who has travelled from Cebu in Sarawak to be with us here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jack Porus, and I'm a lawyer based in Auckland. I've worked closely with Thomas for almost 30 years. Before we start, I'd just like to deal with the usual health and safety issues. The museum is a non-smoking venue, so if you feel the need to smoke, please go outside. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please follow the instructions of our museum hosts. They assure me that they will get you all out safely. The toilet facilities are located behind you in the entrance foyer. Like me, I am sure you are all shocked and saddened to hear of the untimely passing of our dear friend Thomas Song on the 14th of April in Cebu in Sarawak. Thomas had been there paying his respects to the deceased members of his family in the traditional way. I last saw him on the 27th of March. Together with the board of New Zealand King Salmon, we had visited the company's salmon hatchery in Tentburn, just south of Christchurch. We travelled back to Auckland together. I said goodbye to him at the airport in the usual way, not realising that this would be the last time that I would see him. We all have our experiences of Thomas the businessman, but few of us know about his early life and his life as a family man. I therefore would like to ask his son Stephen to speak to us about this more private side of the man we knew. Stephen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. I just want to start off by expressing my gratitude to the Tiong family for all the support they have provided here and in Malaysia at this difficult time. Thank you also to the rest of the Oregon Group family, especially the directors and senior managers who scrambled to provide support and organise this memorial and other initiatives in honour of my father. Thomas was born in Cebu, Malaysia. He was the eldest of 6 brothers and 4 sisters, two of which passed away early on. From what my late grandmother told me, he was a mischievous child who would sneak off to go fishing or bird hunting quite often. He finished school in Form 5 and became a lecturer, teaching class to students much older than he was, although from his grey hairs you probably couldn't tell. He then went on to work for a state-owned fertilizer firm, a state-owned motor vehicle plant in the Malaysian Inland Revenue Department before finally joining the Tiong's group of families in 1975. At age 22, tragedy struck when his father passed away from a brain condition. He now had to take responsibility for looking after his mother and all of his siblings. Keep in mind there was no social welfare in Malaysia and he was living in relative poverty to begin with. I can't imagine the burden of responsibility and the feelings of uncertainty he must have felt at that time. but the family all pulled together and doing whatever menial jobs that they could to pay the rent and put food on the table. He couldn't afford to go to university, so he studied by himself whenever he had time after work and took examinations via correspondence. In the end, he managed to become a chartered accountant and completed law school all by self-study. When I told him I got scholarship grades for economics, he smirked and quietly told me that he once got the world's first prize for economics. Well, okay then. In the early years, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with my father. He seemed to be always busy with work and going away on long business trips. I remember he even had a home office set up where he was always working late into the evenings. I didn't resent him for that because I could see the pride in my grandmother's eyes whenever she talked about how Dad supported the entire family. As my mother tells it, when they got married, the boss said to him, "Thomas, the group is going through a really busy time right now. If you could hold off a bit on the honeymoon, the company will pay for your trip later." He never went on that honeymoon. Dad wasn't a materialistic man. I can't think of a single luxury item that he's bought for himself. He wore a $100 watch, and his suits were made in Cebu for probably about $100. This also showed his humility. He didn't need to show off his success, and he always taught us not to judge people by their wealth or status, but by their values. What he valued was his family, his honor, and his integrity. He continued to provide financial support for his siblings and his children right up until his death. Now that responsibility passes on to me. As a father, he was always supportive of our studies, but he never gave us pressure or compared us to other people's kids. I've faced situations in my life that have plunged me into depression, but Dad was always able to put things in perspective and paint an optimistic picture of the future. There are not many CEOs of large corporates who would fly economy class on international business trips or fly at odd hours just to save the company money. But he told me he was always grateful to the Tiong family for providing him a way out of poverty and for putting their trust in him. I worked alongside him for 17 years, and he's always put the interests of the company above his own. His sense of honor could do no less. Paul Steer, the ex-CEO of New Zealand King Salmon, wrote me a long and detailed condolence letter, and in it he described his first impressions of Thomas, that here was a man that was courteous, cordial, open, and visionary. Above all, he was optimistic, a singular trait that marked his stewardship throughout our association, regardless of challenge or setback. It was a manner and style very different to the arrogance and self-importance that he had encountered with large industrialists in his previous career. Yet it wasn't optimism for positive sake, it was carefully researched and well considered. I'd like to think that was the impression he gave everyone else as well. My greatest sorrow is that Dad didn't get the chance to retire. Thank you, Dad, for all of your hard work. May you finally rest in peace. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Jack to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Stephen. In June 1990, I was introduced to my new client, Thomas Song, and it was in Wellington. He was representing the Tiong family who, through Earns Law 1 Limited, had been successful in becoming the first foreign company to purchase state forests. We spent a couple of days together in Wellington before Thomas was moving on to Gore to inspect the forests and the sawmill which they had agreed to purchase. He was in his lightweight suit, and it did not quite seem appropriate that he should be in that because there was snow on the ground in Southland. I saw the need to provide him with my first piece of advice: to buy a swan dry. He accepted that advice. There was one piece of advice he did not accept, and that was to change the name of the company. I had formed the company as a shelf company for Ernst & Young, and it was usual for the name of a shelf company to be changed once the company had been purchased. He liked the name of the company, even though it sounds a bit like Earns Low. The company over the years has not had low earnings. To the contrary, purchasing these forests was the first step on the journey to build Earnslaw One Limited into one of the largest forestry companies in New Zealand. One of the people who has worked alongside Thomas for all of that journey is the South Island manager, Phil Delamere, and I now invite Phil to speak to us about his experience of working with Thomas. Phil.
Thank you, Jack. Lai Singh and family, Dr. Tiong, friends and colleagues. It's with great sadness that I'm here today, but also a great honour to have known and worked with Thomas for almost 30 years. We first got to know Thomas when he moved with his family to Gore in 1990 to manage the newly purchased Earnslaw One forests and sawmill. It was part of his mission for RH, for want of a better description. They were busy times. Thomas had done all the due diligence himself, no consultants, and when the tendered price was accepted, all the other tenderers were told to go back and sharpen their pencil. He was criticised by his peers for paying too much, yet he saw value in it, which no one else recognised. He quickly appointed 2 regional managers, Bill Johnson and Paul Adams, and a small team of staff was formed. In 1993, we entered into a period of rapid growth spurred on by high log prices. Land purchase, new planting, large capital investment in Blue Mountain Lumber, installation of an RE line, remanufacturing plant producing finger-jointed edge-glued panel. Based at the sawmill, Thomas made a point of regularly visiting all the workstations and knowing the individuals working them. It was around this time that Thomas and Lai Singh moved their family to Tauranga with the purchase of Matakana Island Forest, and soon after, a few years after, moving to Auckland and commencing Lumber Bank and the head office building. The expansion of the estate continued until the Asian crisis and cash dried up. But the forest estate had doubled, so by 2003 it was 50,000 hectares. In 2004, Earnslaw purchased Wagong Forest in Gisborne, adding a further 25,000 hectares. On day one, and Bill will remember this, there was a group of loggers doing a haka outside the offices with a D7 parked up against the front door. They needn't have worried because Thomas was committed to maintaining a harvesting infrastructure despite the forest being heavy loss-making for some time. He won the support of Jim Anderton, who was Minister of Forest under the Labour coalition at the time, for this social commitment. Then in 2007, Earnslaw purchased WPI International, adding another 14,000 hectares, a sawmill and a pulp mill. Then we hit the GFC, and in spite of an extended period of heavy loss-making, Thomas continued to support both processing plants through to again making a profit. There are other battles as well, particularly when Labour were attempting to nationalise carbon credits. He had friends in the industry pulling together, particularly Roger Dickey. Of course, I'm only describing a few of the businesses Thomas managed, yet all with complexities any normal managing director would struggle to cope with. Thomas's management style was unique. He has been the company's strategist, and he has always been able to visualise where we needed to be positioned in the future. He delegated authority, but not responsibility. He had an unwavering sense of optimism based on what he knew was possible with any business he managed. His own job description was troubleshooter. He had an uncanny way of seeing things transparently, and we quickly learned that any proposal put in front of him had to have the logic and detail correct. But in spite of this, he didn't want big glossy reports. Just a one-page spreadsheet would do, but it must be correct. He continually provided guidance for staff and with an immediate response. So his door was always open and he would always answer the phone directly. Thomas always had simple solutions to complex problems. A small example, when he was at Blue Mountain Lumber, there was a problem with pigeons making a mess in the dry store. So Thomas solved that one by going out at lunchtimes with a Shanghai. He often brought Chinese sayings into his management style. A few of them I remember: don't put legs on the snake, when we thought we were going into too much detail. Stop teaching the ducks how to swim, when he thought we were telling our contractors how to do their job. And you can't cook without rice was a favourite, if we ran the risk of over-promising a resource. He also wanted to ensure his Kiwi staff were familiar with Chinese cuisine when we're overseas. So that could mean eating such things as bullfrog and all body parts of ducks and chickens. I mentioned earlier that New Zealand was Thomas's mission, and he undertook his duty and service with loyalty and humility. These are traits you won't see with career CEOs. I make no apology for that. He always cautioned being over-ambitious, yet there were also gambles taken. During the Asian crisis in 1998, we were unable to sell any export logs or lumber to Korea for 3 months. Things were really bad, with customers having no ability to open LCs. And I can recall Richard Che flying to Korea to visit customers and being one of only 6 passengers on a Korean Air jet. Thomas decided it was worth the risk of filling a vessel with $2 million worth of lumber and logs, sending it to Korea and waiting for payment. Who would do that these days? He even convinced Juanita and City Forest to add some of their volume. The alternative was worse: no sales and contractor layoffs. However, we got paid, and in the process, Thomas established new loyal customers, unwavering customers. Peter Ware also recalls Thomas saying to him in the midst of the GFC that there is no plan, I'm playing poker with the bank. History has proved Thomas's insight correct. Thomas loved his family, but with his typical understated way, you would have to pry him for details. However, in the last few years as a grandfather, he would proudly show the latest photos on his phone before we started the meeting. We have gone through several crises previously with Thomas here to steer us through, but now we have a new one: no captain. However, Thomas has made the foundations of the business solid, and we owe it to him to steer away through this one which nobody expected. To Lei Singh and family, I don't have the right words to say, except you've always made us feel part of a large, extended family, and that's very special for us.
Thank you, Phil. The 1990s was an exciting time in New Zealand. With the adoption of Rogernomics in the 1980s, it became a land of opportunity, and Thomas recognised this. The Tiong family were interested in investing in a wide range of business opportunities. They had confidence in the future of the New Zealand economy. Oregon Group was formed to take advantage of such investment opportunities. Purchasers of a substantial shareholding in Port of Auckland and Southport brought Oregon to the attention of all the merchant bankers, and I was suddenly inundated with calls providing opportunities to invest. In 1993, Northington Partners contacted me to say that they were mandated to sell all the shares in the Neil Group, a land development company based in Auckland. This business was well known to me, and I referred the opportunity on to Thomas. He wasted no time in securing the business. In doing so, Thomas demonstrated two of his great qualities: to be quick in recognizing an opportunity and to be decisive in securing it. Within 10 days of meeting with the then managing director, Dick White, he not only decided to buy it with the support of the Tiong family, but also had completed the settlement of the purchase. I now ask Phil Ainsworth, who's the managing director of Neil Group, to speak to us about Thomas's contribution to this business. Phil.
Thank you, Jack. My first recollection of Thomas was when he visited our company, as Jack said, in late 1993. And Jack has often recalled that was part of the fastest due diligence he's ever seen. As a property development company, the Neil Group already had a long history and a solid reputation. But at that time, we were owned jointly by Briley Investments, Fletcher's, and our then managing director, Dick White. Three different shareholders with somewhat conflicting goals. As an ownership mix, that really wasn't deemed to last, and as a result, the company had been offered for sale on what was really still the back end of a downturn in the property market. At the time, those of us in the company probably saw our future as managing a likely sell down of assets rather than being subject to a takeover, given the state of the market at the time. Thomas's visit looked simply like another group of men in suits wandering through the property looking to pick over the bones. But due diligence completed, and Thomas saw the potential in the company and made an offer to buy Neil's, which was accepted. And that really was a lifesaver for the company Neil's, because I don't think we'd be here today if Thomas hadn't bought the shares in the business. And so began a period of ownership by the Tiong family that has extended now for over 25 years. And for those of us working in the company at the time, it meant future stability and a chance to start building the business back up again after a period of uncertainty. A well-known property investor in New Zealand, Bob Jones, is often quoted as saying that all property development companies go broke. And we have seen a few go down that path over the years as the property cycle goes round. But for Thomas, that wasn't the end game. Rather, it was about building the Neil Group as an investment based on continuing profitability, and by adopting a conservative approach for property developers of minimal debt and reinvestment of equity. Property development, and especially land subdivision, is quite often a long game, and Thomas recognised that in supporting the way we ran the business. At one stage, Thomas did flirt with the idea of a public listing, but he soon recognised that it's difficult to produce a prospectus in property development for more than 3 months out, and so decided that it wasn't really a good idea. And in hindsight, that was a great decision, as the business has made a profit in every single year the Tiong family has owned it. Sometimes getting the timing right to complete projects and record profit by the end of our financial year has been a challenge, as subdivision and build developments can easily get delayed. But Thomas was always pretty relaxed about that. And when it happened as recently as last June, when we missed the projected finish date for one of our projects, he just laughed and said, "No problem, Phil, we get to pay the company tax that much later." Always good to hold on to your cash. Under Thomas's guidance, the company has grown substantially over those years, from the $17.1 million purchase price that was paid for the business in 1993 to a company worth around $350 million today. During those years of ownership, Thomas was always very supportive of the business, and that included a very early call to guarantee the purchase of the Albany Centre site at a price that was higher than the Tiong family had paid for the whole company at the time. That was a good example of the way Thomas operated. Without wanting to be hands-on, Thomas could always be relied upon to provide quick decisions where we asked them of him. On a more personal note, Thomas is one of the few men I know that could truly multitask. It wasn't uncommon for him to be taking part in a discussion whilst having one eye on the exchange rates on his phone and at the same time reading a spreadsheet. With Thomas, though, there was never any need to repeat anything, as he had a very astute commercial mind and quickly honed in on the key issues. For our company, he was also very supportive of internal promotion, appointing Grant Brebner as Chief Executive when Dick White retired, and then when Grant stepped down, allowing me to move into the role. That's provided us with really good continuity for our business over all these years. As you've heard, Thomas was always early for board meetings so that he could have a cup of tea, and he often used the opportunity to keep us updated on the activities of the rest of the Oregon group. With his keen sense of humour, he particularly liked to tell us about his carbon credits and how he could make money out of hot air. Much easier than property development, Phil, he'd say. He was also very proud of his heritage and the achievements of the Tiong family. And that came across really strongly when we visited Cebu in 2015 for the 45th anniversary celebrations, and when both he and Yong took great pride in acting as our hosts and tour guides for us. As both a director and in more recent years chairman of the Neil Group, Thomas was both a supportive and guiding influence for us, and there's no doubt he will be sorely missed. Above all, though, he will be remembered by all of us at Neil's as the Tiong family representative in New Zealand that helped build the Neil Group to the company it is today.
Thank you, Phil. In 1994, the salmon industry in New Zealand was in crisis. During the 1980s, world salmon prices were high, which encouraged the establishment of many salmon farming businesses in the South Island. Thomas saw salmon farming as a reliable future source of protein, so he bought a shareholding in the listed company Regal Salmon. Like the rest, it was in trouble. Sandy Mayer had been installed to manage the company for the ANZ Bank, and Sandy approached Thomas to provide further funding. Thomas stepped up and ultimately gained control of the company. I was assigned the task of sacking the board. Thomas hated confrontation. And that is why he asked me to undertake tasks such as this. The company was based in Picton, and as we gained control of the company, we found that there was an aggressive competitor over the hill in Nelson called Southern Ocean Seafoods. Thomas wanted to acquire this, but the owner was Salmon Smith Biolab, which at the time was a listed public company. They did not want to sell this asset on its own. He gave me one simple instruction: proceed to launch a takeover offer for the parent company. In the course of this, we had to negotiate with colourful characters like Chris Liddell, who's now working with Donald Trump in the White House, and Shane Jones, who's currently working in the Beehive. We were successful in taking over the company, and we put together the two salmon companies to form what is currently known as New Zealand King Salmon. In doing this, Thomas saved the salmon industry in New Zealand. The managing director of New Zealand King Salmon is Grant Rosewarne, and I invite Grant to speak to us about Thomas's contribution to the company. Grant.
Unfortunately, I only knew Thomas for a mere 10 years. Some of these relationships go back, 20, 25 years, and I really envy those of you that have had that longer association with Thomas. He was always an incredibly strong supporter of the salmon industry. I have to say, whilst maybe logs and property, they might have been his first love, we like to think of him in salmon as his true love. With any board of directors, each has their own role. Each one plays a unique part in that board. Some have the sort of a red hat on, which is about risk and seeing dangers ahead. Others are evaluative, and they play that black hat role. I'd have to say of Thomas that he was a true visionary. He was a true believer from day one in salmon farming and in New Zealand king salmon. And he played that incredibly important role about being positive, being optimistic, and recognising the potential of the company, which was, it was just great to have him around the table. It really was, when we're trying to get something across the line, we'd look over to Thomas, and quick as anything, he would be there with a supporting comment, and he would go right to the strategy of the business and really get to the core of the matter. And on more than one occasion, Jack mentioned it, but Thomas and the Tiong family really stepped up and helped consolidate the industry and also provide additional capital that we sorely needed at the time. Not only did they supply capital, but only 2 years ago we floated as a public company. And the Tiong family, I think we're one of their more premium products, and so sort of loved within the portfolio for that. We're not on the scale of the others. We'd love to be, but unfortunately we're not. But we've got this really premium nature about us, and I think we're sort of valued amongst the group because of that. So in a way, I think if the Tiong family had their way, we would still be 100% owned by the Tiong family. But they've always acted, and Thomas always acted, in the interests of the company. And when we floated, they generously agreed to provide additional liquidity and to make the free float larger than it would have otherwise been. At a personal level, Thomas was always willing to connect with people throughout the company. And he actually came to our inaugural Aquaculture Excellence Awards. So these are awards we set up to recognise our aquaculture people for doing the very unique things that they do. And not all the directors could come along, but Thomas was more than happy to. And that was typical from what I heard earlier about in forestry and in property, that Thomas wanted to connect with all levels of the company. And he came along to the awards, and we recognised him as the saviour of the salmon industry, which indeed he was. And we got to recognise him in front of everybody, everybody in aquaculture. And we didn't know that that would be the last time that he would engage with those people, but it was fantastic that that happened. As you've heard, Thomas had this incredibly positive outlook on life, and it just carried over into business and investment, and with it, so much energy. It was a ball of energy. You could see he thought quickly, he calculated quickly, strategic decisions were made quickly, he spoke quickly, everything happened fast with Thomas, and that's pretty rare. And I gotta say, he both had the spreadsheet and the intuition that went along with that, and that enabled him to operate very quickly and to be very effective as a businessman. Another great thing about Thomas is he was always encouraging us to look outwards. And I know we all think it now, but China was not always perceived as being the incredible opportunity that it is now and what it is to New Zealand. And I'd have to say, just Thomas was way ahead of his generation, I think mainly because of his background, recognising the potential of China, and was saying it long before anybody else. And it's one of my regrets that we don't sell more salmon there. The reason is we just don't have enough of it, unfortunately. But if we did, we would be in that market, or we are in that market, we'd be in there on a larger scale, and Thomas would have been able to take the credit for that one too. So we're putting that one aside for the future, and we do hope that one day we get the volume that we've always aspired to and that Thomas always dreamed that we would have, and we will conquer that Chinese market at some point. So just in conclusion, Thomas will be greatly missed around our board table, but more importantly, he'll be missed as a friend of the company and as a friend of the entire salmon industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. There were a number of other businesses and investments in which he was involved, but which have now been sold, including Biolab Scientific, Aquaria 21, and a number of radio stations. One business which he purchased in 2008 and retained was Winston Pulp International. It comprised the Karioi pulp mill near Oakuni, an adjacent sawmill, and 16,000 hectares of forests in very close proximity to those processing sites, and it was losing money. However, Thomas noted that when losses were made, they were modest compared with the profits which were made in good years. Thomas consolidated the forestry assets into Earnslaw One's estate and transferred all of the Earnslaw wood processing assets into Winston Pulp. However, 5 months after the purchase, the global financial crisis hit, and it took rather longer than expected to realise those profits. But today, the company has now realised those profits, and the expectations have been realised. Thomas was glued to his phone. Even in meetings, he was regularly checking the markets and contracting foreign exchange and other deals. We used to laugh that Thomas seemed to be able to make money out of thin air, which in fact he did, as you have heard. He was an early proponent of carbon credits and helped to develop the world-leading market for trading in these credits. He is credited with undertaking the first sale of carbon credits, which was in 2009. This was a sale of credits to the Norwegian government. Because Earnslaw has the largest areas of new forest plantings in New Zealand, it became the largest holder of carbon credits. He loved trading in this market and watched as prices, which started at $14, dropped to $2 and then back up to $25, where it is today. He loved being a major player in this market. However, in order to undertake these investments and grow the business, Thomas needed supportive bankers. He has worked with a number of banking groups over the years. In recent years, he has enjoyed the support of a banking syndicate led by BNZ, which includes ICBC and the Bank of China. We're pleased to have with us today Hamish Hurley, who's the manager of the group's account with the BNZ, and I now invite Hamish to speak to us about playing poker with Thomas.
Lei Sing, Stephen and family, we're very sorry for your loss. Thomas was a great man and we enjoyed doing business with him as his banker. BNZ has had a long association with Thomas and the Oregon Group, dating back to 1992 when we were invited to fund Earnslaw One. There is a big BNZ contingent here today, together with members from Oregon's current syndicate banks, Bank of China and ICBC, to share their respects. I've personally known Thomas since 2013, and I wanted to share some of those memories. Okay, so a quick question. What does a piece of salmon, a click-clack container, a wine glass, a broom, a pulp and paper mill, forestry estates, a retirement village, commercial and residential property development have in common? The answer, Thomas Song and the Oregon Group. My most poignant memory comes from the 25th anniversary celebration of Earnslaw One held in Rotorua in November 2015. For those of you that were there, you will recall guest speaker Bill English, the then Deputy Prime Minister at the time, saying that Earnslaw One reflected the best of foreign investment in New Zealand. The best of foreign investment in New Zealand. I distinctly remember those words. Thomas really stood on ceremony, and the shelf company that was used for his marquee company, Earnslaw One, I think attests to that. In our dealings with Thomas, he was always very commercial, had a good understanding of the big picture with an eye on the horizon, and made decisions quickly. He didn't sweat the small stuff. And you compare that to many businesses today, where the investment focus is short term. Thomas's vision included being an early adopter of the carbon credit regime. He could see value in that where others couldn't. And he also enjoyed being a player in the carbon credit markets. There weren't too many other forestry CEOs who were willing to do a repo of carbon credits. Another example, as Grant's mentioned, came with the NZ King Salmon IPO. Oregon Group had a 51% interest. The advice was that a larger free float would help with market liquidity and the ultimate success of that IPO. Thomas quickly saw that, and the ownership stake was reduced to 40%. So NZ King Salmon has been one of the few successful market listings in recent years. Well done, Grant. With a market cap now some 315 million, double that at the time of listing in 2016. Thomas's other defining feature was the trust and respect he had for his management teams. Our observation is that Thomas surrounded himself by good people and let subsidiary companies run largely autonomously. Micromanagement wasn't Thomas's style, a theme that you regularly see celebrated. Thomas loved guiding the Oregon Group of companies. When Curtis and I had lunch with Thomas earlier this year, he indicated that he wanted to continue working until he was 80. You were gone too soon, Thomas. You will be missed.
Thank you, Hamish. Thomas was a quiet man. He did not seek the limelight. He was not a confident public speaker, and he often got me to speak for him. He often was difficult to understand, particularly when he got excited. And I was often called upon to interpret what he had just said. However, Thomas did give one interview in recent years. In this interview, we can even hear Thomas speak clearly about his accomplishments, and they are in his own words. We're going to play that interview for you. But to introduce that interview, I invite the interviewer, Mei Chen, who is a very highly regarded lawyer, to come forward. Mei.
Kia ora tātou, Daja hao, Lai Sing, Stephen. Thank you very much for the honour of allowing me to introduce the video. I speak here today as the Chair of New Zealand Asian Leaders. I also sit on the Bank of New Zealand board, so can I say to Hamish Hurley, it's good that we were banking Thomas Song, because clearly he was a very good investment. Can I say that as Chair, I wanted to conscript Thomas Song to our cause, and he along with everything else that he was doing, contributed to New Zealand Asian leaders. I look at Ming Lim Pollard. She said to me, we need to get Thomas Song involved. I Googled Thomas Song. I was astounded that an Asian immigrant who had contributed so much to this country was completely unknown. And so I went out to try and conscript him. And he lent his money, he was a sponsor, and his support to New Zealand Asian Leaders. What is New Zealand Asian Leaders? It is an organisation that celebrates all of New Zealand's top Asian leaders. It is an organisation that mentors other Asian leaders. And the reason why I wanted to conscript Thomas was because he was the best, the brightest star. He showed the heights of the contribution that we as Asian migrants can make to our adopted country. There are so many New Zealand Asian leaders here today, and I speak on your behalf. I see the Suhois here. I see members of the New Zealand Asian Leaders Board that serve together with Thomas. Ming is here. Zaina Jalil is here. So many of the other members of the advisory board who cannot be here pay their respects. So Thomas had all of the best characteristics that we want to profile as Asian leaders contributing to this country: hard work, risk-taking, blood, sweat and tears. We've heard about them. And the reason why Thomas accepted was he valued his heritage. You heard about that today. But boy, did we see the very best of being Chinese as a superpower in Thomas Song. You know, Thomas never said anything unless he needed to. He was loyal, he was steadfast, he was consistent. He was always the first person to arrive at the board meetings for New Zealand Asian Leaders. He sat on our advisory board. He often arrived before I did as chair of New Zealand Asian Leaders. But you know, this interview that you're about to witness tells you a lot about Thomas Song. He wouldn't give me an interview. I said, Thomas, I won't accept no for an answer. You are the best of us. You are the brightest. I need an interview. Then I had the interview. I think the interview you are about to see is the second interview, because at the first interview, I could not get Thomas to talk about all the great things he had done. So I have to tell you that this is me cross-examining Thomas. Jack and I share a profession. You will see that I'm leading my witness because he just won't spit it out. So I'm asking him questions such as, why are you so wonderful, Thomas? Tell me about your greatest successes. And you will see even then that I had difficulties getting it out of him. But he was very proud of what Asians could contribute and what we have contributed to this country. And the lovely Stephen Song is now on the New Zealand Asian Leaders Advisory Board. Thomas rang me and said, it is time for me to stand down, but I want my son to be on the advisory board. Well, I Googled Stephen Song. He seemed like a fantastic person to have on our board. We needed someone who was young and who reflected the values that we wanted as role models. I see the strengths of his father in him, as well as his own unique strengths. And I say to you, Stephen, you will carry on the torch for your father. Big shoes for you to fill, my friend, but you will do it. Stephen, I just want you to know how much your father loved you and how proud he was of you. He said to me, no, Stephen must go on the board because he will have a lot to contribute. So I will always forever be grateful that I knew Thomas, and I celebrate his life today. I've heard people from Earnslaw One, from Neil Group from New Zealand, King Salmon. I've heard from the Bank of New Zealand representative that the former Prime Minister talked about the contribution that Thomas was very much involved in making as the best of foreign investment in New Zealand. And I say that I celebrate Thomas's life today, and I hold it up as an example that we can follow of how immigration, such as Thomas brought to this country, is an example of how we can change the business landscape forever. New Zealand isn't the same because Thomas came. He came with his family. Look at the contribution that he made. Let us reflect on what legacy we will leave when our own earthly lives end. What has Thomas's life taught me? Wow. And I acknowledge Karinia Lee, who's here today, the CEO of New Zealand Asian Leaders, Preeti Garud. All of these people worked with Thomas. What I reflect on is this. Thomas is still teaching me. You know, the Buddhists say you never know how long you will have. But what Thomas has taught me, as I reflect on his life today, is that you should live life as he lived it. He lived a tidy life. We're not going to go now and find a whole bunch of skeletons in his closet because Thomas didn't have any time to have any. He was busy working and generating value that fed his family and that enriched a nation. What he has taught me is that I must live every day as my best self. And then, whenever life ends, I can be pleased that I did the best that I could. So this is Thomas' song, The Best I Could Get Him. All right, on tape. Thank you. I'm very fortunate to have Mr. Thomas Song. He's the Chief Executive of Oregon Group. When did you come to New Zealand, Thomas?
Oh, I came to New Zealand in 1990,
Right.
December, and I've been here for 23 years.
So you're an accountant by training?
Yes.
Tell me about the contribution you've made as CEO of Oregon Group to New Zealand.
In New Zealand, we did quite a number of projects which is of huge significance to New Zealand. In 1994, through New International Limited, which is a 100% subsidiary of Oregon Group, we launched the Albany Regional Center. And today it is a very vibrant center in the North Shore.
Fantastic.
And in 1995, we initiated the rescue of 2 failing salmon farmers, and then we consolidated them into New Zealand King Salmon Company Limited, who is now an iconic company in New Zealand.
Absolutely. In fact, my understanding is that you can't produce enough product because Asia just loves what it is.
Yes.
And where are you exporting king salmon?
I think we export all the way to United States, Australia, Japan, and now Europe as well.
Right.
And in between 1998 and 2008, I was the chairman of New Zealand King Salmon.
Oh, right.
And together with our colleague, we turned 2 loss-making companies, which lost about 30 million per annum, into a very, very profitable company at the end of the day.
Fantastic.
And today it's still growing quite well. And
So how many New Zealanders do you think you've employed during your 23 years in New Zealand?
I think it's around 800,
800.
today.
Right.
And also, we between 1994 and 2000, we actually planted 27,000 hectares of new plantation forests in New Zealand. And to be frank, right, while other companies might be very proud that they are carbon neutral, our company actually sequestrates 1.2 million tons of carbon every year, each and every year.
Yeah.
And even between the year 1990 to the year of accounting under the ETS, virtually 4 million tons of our carbon credit has been nationalized by our government. The value is actually equal to 18 billion Kiwi dollars.
Wow. So tell me, as an Asian CEO, who's also a New Zealander, what do you think are the unique benefits that we can provide to the New Zealand economy?
I think the unique benefit is the understanding of the Asian culture. I mean, we understand the Chinese history as well as the Southeast Asian history. So we tend to be more multi-cultural than just unique cultural in a sense. So we tend to be able to step into the other shoes when doing business with those guys, rather than trying to see only our way. We tend to see that what are the problems with the other guy, what sort of issue they have, what sort of, even if they are working as CEO for a foreign company, what sort of pressure they are under. And then we try to find a way forward by stepping into the other shoes and see what they want. Because when I talk business with as business partner, I always ask the first question, what do you actually want?
Yes.
And then I see from his point of view and see how I can accommodate that.
Yes.
So he's always looking for the win-win formula rather than only I win, you lose, and nothing else.
So tell me, do you think the potential of the 10% of Asian New Zealanders is being met, achieved in New Zealand? Are we getting all that potential, all of the special characteristics out of our leaders?
I don't think so, because just like any Asian personality, we tend to be a bit more moderate and a very low profile. We never raise our head if we don't have to. Really. So we might have potential, but sometimes when I discuss with my Kiwi colleagues and friends, I tend to more or less feel much more relaxed in discussing what I thought, what are my visions for the country. I think for a moment, because I'm in forestry, right? While I'm perfectly happy with the Radiata pine regime that we have, but there are also enough potential that has never been explored, that is of hardwood. Hardwood is the thing is because while we have so much forest around the world, they are being locked up one by one or being exploited to extinctions.
Yes.
Right? So we should be able to find something that can replace hardwood. And I'm still in the quest of finding one hardwood that grows in New Zealand fast enough and can replace the hardwood of the rest of the world.
So tell me, why do you think we need New Zealand Asian leaders?
I think we can see from the Asian point of view, and the next century belongs to Asians. So I think if we don't understand the culture, it's very hard for us to do business with. And we tend to have made a lot of statement that is either stereotype or is taboo to the Asians. And we have to be very careful when we deal with different Asians rather than just Asian alone.
But do you think New Zealand Asian leaders can bring some leadership that will help New Zealand succeed in Asia?
Certainly, you will.
Yes. Great. Thank you very much, Thomas Song.
Thanks.
Thank you, May, and thank you, Thomas. Thomas achieved much during his time in New Zealand, but he could not have done so without the confidence and support of the Tiong family. They trusted him to establish and grow their interests in this far-flung extremity of the world. Thomas enjoyed the large degree of autonomy given to him, and he rewarded the family by building what has become a major part of the Tiong group. I now invite Dr. Paul Tiong to come forward and deliver his eulogy. Dr. Tiong.
Dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I come with a heavy heart to this memorial service to honor and pay tribute to my colleague and fellow director of 40 years. Thomas Song's sudden death is a tremendous blow to us all. His death made me think of the best and the most brilliant army general China ever had. His name is Huo Qubing, a fearless general who lived during the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago. He led major victorious military campaigns against Xiongnu or Turk invasions, but died suddenly at a young age of 23 from a short illness. Though he enjoyed immense personal triumphs and glories, his life was transient and unfulfilled. For Thomas, it was different. Although he did not live to the ripe old age of 90 or 100, he lived a full and fulfilled life and enjoyed a very good run. He secured great success and achievements for himself, his family, and for us. We are so proud of him and his accomplishments. He had been a pioneer, a beacon, and a pillar of our group in New Zealand in the past 3 decades. At some of the times where we spent together over the years, Thomas and I sometimes reminisced on our early days in Malaysia, where we worked closely on a number of M&A deals involving timber and media companies. We share a lot of fun and exciting moments together. I remember the good times we spent together in faraway Harbour Rocks, in Far East Russia. We traveled for hours over long distances in the solitude of the Russian snowy wilderness, and trudging over thick snow just to study and admire Russian spruce and larch trees. There were also many trips I made to New Zealand, sometimes with my small children, when we were taken very special care of by Thomas. We established a very solid bond and rapport together while leaving behind a lot of warm memories. Thomas came to New Zealand originally to head up Ernst Law 1's operation after our family group bought timberlands from the New Zealand government. We foresaw a bright future in plantation timber. Over time, we did more deals together, like the acquisition of Regal Salmon, Salmon Smith Biolab, WPI, New Group, etc. While we lamented on a big fish that got away, like the New Zealand Rail, Nelson Pine, and Montana Winery, we thanked our lucky stars. On the one that we fought hard and lost, the Seeing Eye Forest deal. This deal turned out to be an industry killer for the winners who later suffered horrendous losses. Thomas predicted that they overpaid massively and was proven right. Here, I also wish to credit Thomas for his perseverance and faith in pursuing the New Zealand Carbon Credit Scheme with other friendly industrial players. Its eventual implementation by the government brought huge rewards and long-lasting benefits to us. On a personal level, Thomas was easygoing, optimistic, and level-headed. He was kind, honest, and pragmatic. Always a numbers man, he possessed a sharp business sense and was well known to be serious and passionate with his duties and responsibilities. Above all, he was loyal, steadfast, and totally dependable. He enjoyed our full confidence and trust throughout the years. In his lifetime, I noticed there were certain things that never changed with him. Whenever he came to Singapore with Lei Hsien for a visit, the menu he chose was always the same and unfailingly Japanese. He loved and savored Japanese cuisine. His favorite pastime was fishing, and he had a knack of reeling in fish after fish during our fishing trips, much to our dismay and frustration. He might have a small build, but he had a big heart. Coming from a poor background and being the eldest in his family, he was generous and caring to his siblings and their families. He had found a perfect match in Lei Hsien, and they supported each other to set up and maintain a stable, loving family over the years. With his departure, I'll miss his cheerful smile and hearty laughter, his frequent and familiar voice over the phone, his warm spirit, his zest for life, and his wise counsel. He was unforgettable. I thank him for his great friendship, camaraderie, loyalty, and stewardship. I'm sure all of us will always remember him fondly and have his memory etched firmly in our minds. Thomas, we bid you farewell. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tiong. For many of us, the reality that Thomas is no longer with us has yet to sink in. His seat at the head of the Niels Group board table this week was empty. We will miss his open, positive personality. We will miss him arriving early for all meetings. We will miss his quick, sensible decisions. We will miss his enthusiasm for business. We will miss those wonderful, little appropriate Chinese sayings. He said, "Tiger hunting is for the young. Don't go tiger hunting when you are old, because the tiger might get you." I've done quite a lot of tiger hunting with Thomas. We captured and kept some, which you've heard about today, but also many got away, as referred to by Dr. Tiong. However, his days of tiger hunting are now over. In Maori tradition, when a great man passes away, we say that a mighty totara has fallen in the forest. How appropriate it is to say this about Thomas. We'll greatly miss Thomas the husband, Thomas the father and the grandfather, Thomas the son and brother, Thomas the leader, Thomas the colleague, but most of all, we will miss Thomas the friend. I propose that we conclude this service with 2 minutes of contemplation, following which we will invite you all to join us for a light lunch. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got a memorial book which is on a stand behind you. We do invite each of you to sign that before you leave. Please now join us for some refreshments. Thank you.